Hi, Saurabh. Thank you so much for joining today. Yeah.
Hey, Johan, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about fortifying Azure data resilience with Veeam Data Cloud. So thank you for watching as well. I'm Staff Solutions Architect at Veeam. And Saurabh, do you want to give us a little intro as well?
Yes, sure. Thanks everyone for listening in to Johan and my session. My name is Saurabh Sensharma. I'm a principal PM on the Azure Storage team at Microsoft. And it's been several years of working together with Johan and Veeam, and very thankful for this partnership with Veeam.
Same. Yeah. Thank you so much. So before I skip ahead, right, we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Protecting data with Veeam, why would you do it? And then when it comes to Veeam Data Cloud, which is Veeam's as a service offering, what does that entail? And then maybe spend a little bit of time on futures as well. So happy to have you guys, and let's get started. When it comes to infrastructure these days, right, it doesn't just live in one place anymore. It's getting more and more complicated, and it's generating more and more data every year. Apparently, it's doubling every year now, which doesn't surprise me if you think about it. And the complexity is getting quite up there too, with containers, with as a service things, with stuff living as infrastructure as code or in repositories in different places. And you just have to think about where you want the data to live today and where you might want it to live tomorrow, especially if you think about the hypervisor things that are happening in the on-premises world. Yeah, there are hardware refreshes, but really there are much bigger problems in life, right? Ransomware is a huge issue. And so for organizations that are hit by ransomware, we do a survey every year. And of the ones that were hit and decided to pay, which obviously you don't want to be in that situation. And with Veeam and immutability, you wouldn't be in this situation. 27% of organizations say, hey, we paid, but we never got anything back, right? So you don't want to be in that place. And I don't know if you have any other color to add here, right? But if we think about why backup matters, it's becoming more and more important.
Very true. And I think these numbers are staggering, and it just goes to show that the need to protect your data and scale that protection across hybrid infrastructures and different kinds of data being generated is an urgent need for customers everywhere.
Yeah. So Veeam as a platform we focus on 5 pillars, right? Data backup, making sure it's immutable and stored in a way that you can recover from it. Making sure you can recover wherever you want to. We talked a little bit about the different things happening in the ecosystem, but you want to be able to pick the infrastructure of tomorrow and not have to worry about being stuck in where you are now. And then from a security perspective, when you recover, you don't want to recover with the malware as well, right? So you want to make sure that the data is checked, that you know that what you're recovering is what you wanted to bring back. And then what else can you do with backup data? Can you get intelligence out of it, right? These are the things that we're working on at Veeam. Now, if we look at our customers, right, we have about 550,000 customers globally. And those customers have, in a way, validated our success, right? And so there's a lot of complexity to this, but there's a lot of different places where we're starting to shine. And if you think about this, in the cloud world, there's some mixed messages that happen, right? Would you transition your protection to a vendor, or should you use the hyperscaler for that? Like, do you have an opinion on that, Saurabh?
Yeah, great point, Johanna. This is something that customers struggle with a lot. And, we have a framework called the shared responsibility model that really defines what is the division of responsibilities between the customer, and the vendor, Microsoft in this case, for various IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS services, and how that responsibility in some sense extends to the customer or is shared by the customer as well, right? Now, on this visual that you see, on the left-hand side, you have the shared responsibility model framework where you have on-prem, IaaS, and PaaS, and SaaS. In the on-prem world, of course, the customer manages everything. But then, like you said, as they move to SaaS, they start sharing some of these responsibilities. In fact, offloading some of these responsibilities completely to the vendor as well. But the one thing, if you notice the blue boxes on the top row, responsibilities that are always retained by the customer include data, devices, accounts, and identities, because they strictly belong to the enterprise organization leveraging these infrastructure models, on-prem, IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. So the important thing to take away from this slide is, regardless of how much complexity you have in your infrastructure, how much ever distribution you have in your data, your devices, and your accounts and identities are your responsibility. And therefore, protecting those things is also something that you have complete ownership of. So Therefore, you need to understand that all data that you have is yours, and you need a way to protect it, and you're responsible for it. So that's the key takeaway from this slide, Johan.
No, that's awesome. And thank you for taking us through that. If you think about shared responsibility, being able to say, well, look, you still own your data, right? There's more to that, right? You
Absolutely.
have to trust everything in the infrastructure, right? And there's a lot of resilience that Microsoft provides in this. There's a lot of really cool things happening in the backend to make sure that everything you have in the cloud stays up and running. The contents of the stuff in the cloud, well, that's still critical. So how do you protect against that? Like, how do you make sure that you follow the right principles when you design something like this? I don't know if you can sort of
Yeah,
go
sure,
through that.
sure. No, great point. And I think I like the way you framed it, where you said there is a lot of focus on certain set of principles on which, these solutions need to be designed. And the reason is very simple. You motivated that when you talked about the fact that there is a surge in ransomware attacks. And so you really need a framework to be able to get that data to be protected where it resides and how it is handled. And so we have something which is pretty well known in the industry, especially the security and data protection industry today, which is called the zero trust set of principles. Three very simple but very effective principles. Verify explicitly to make sure you're authenticating every single identity, every single individual that is, responsible for accessing data. Use least privilege access. You don't need to provide more access than is required by the individual accessing the data. And finally, you need to ensure that you assume breach, and therefore every single point of access could be a point of attack. And you need to have the right set of protections built in just in case that access actually led to an attack. And so these three principles underlie every single Microsoft and Veeam solutions together to ensure customers have the peace of mind, and they know they're essentially buying into a solution that allows these levers to be managed by the customer. And so these are still some very important things to talk about as well. If you go to the next slide, Johan, there is
Would you
bunch
transit?
of pillars, and each pillar has a very clearly defined objective that the customer, along with the partnership with the vendors that they trust, need to achieve. Right? I'll go from left to right. If you think about identities, you need to verify and secure every single identity with strong authentication. That includes having things like multi-factor authentication to ensure you have different ways of verifying, an individual's or an identity's, correctness or trust. The second is devices. You can only allow compliant and trusted apps and devices to be able to access your data. And then when it comes to data, which is also the focus of this conversation today, you have to protect sensitive data wherever it lives or travels or resides, because that is your proprietary data. It's your crown jewels on which your business depends. Let's talk about apps, which is the fourth pillar here. You need to ensure applications are available, visible, but most importantly, they are secured from ensuring that they are not running some kind of malicious code or any malicious attacker's payload that can affect the rest of your infrastructure. And then finally, coming to infrastructure and your network, you need to ensure you harden all defenses and detect and respond to threats in real time. And finally, as it comes to network, you have to verify every access request that comes in based on the first pillar that we saw in the previous slides. So there are so many objectives and so many pillars, and there are a lot of times that customers have to worry across different subgroups or different divisions of their organizations in making sure all these pillars and objectives are achieved. Well, as it turns out, our joint solutions actually have a way to give you a solution and enable easy management and peace of mind in managing these pillars and objectives. So, Johan, why don't you take us through that as well?
No, really appreciate it. So with Veeam, there's a lot of different products available depending on which part of the environment you're talking about, right? There's a lot of complexity to these environments, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can make this easier. So Veeam Backup for M365 allows you to protect the data that you might have living on Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Teams, right? And you can deploy that on Azure Marketplace. You could also deploy it on premises. So we'll talk about a few other deployment models in a minute. Veeam Backup for Azure, same idea, right? VMs, SQL, files. Cast and K10 by Veeam supports Azure Kubernetes and other workloads that you might have in other Kubernetes flavors that you can then portably move to Azure Kubernetes if you wanted to. And then there's Veeam Backup and Replication, which supports your on-premises environments, but can also be deployed in the cloud. And that supports VMware, Hyper-V, Azure Stack HCI, you name it, right? So there's a wide gamut here. But of course, there's a complexity to storing all of this. This has to live somewhere when you make this backup, right? Where do you store it?
Yeah, great point, Johan. And Azure Blob Storage is the massively scalable exabyte scale platform with high availability and redundancy to be the perfect place to have secured data plane for your backups that you make with the Veeam solutions that Johan talked about. And what it allows you to do is to really transform the way you achieve the 3-2-1 rule of backup that we've known so well, 3 copies, 2 in 2 different medias and 1 offsite. And that is really achievable with some of these availability and redundancy schemes. So if you go from left to right, you can actually have, your data stored in a single region, either within a single data center. And that's typically what, a lot of our joint customers prefer when they have to store on-prem backups to Azure as an offsite. But some of the customers also want additional resiliency against data center failures. And so you can pick zonal redundant storage, or ZRS, which is the second option from the left, which keeps you in the region, but gives you 3 different availability zones. You could also read that as 3 different data centers within the same region, separated by at least 5 to 10 miles of distance. And that allows you to get protection against data center, node, and rack failures. But what it does not protect against, and if you're having a workload that needs to have extremely high resiliency to even regional disasters, you can pick our availability schemes, which are dual region. So whether it's the read access geo-redundant storage, or RAGRS, which is again something that a lot of our customers together prefer when they have to have Azure as an offsite and want to perform cross-region recoveries, or CRR, and they read those copies on demand from the 3 replicas available in the second region. Or if you want to combine data center resiliency with regional resiliency, you have the option of what we call read access geo-zonal redundant storage, or RAGZRS. A lot of acronyms, but then these acronyms also give you an additional level of protection against both data center and regional failures. So you have all these options. And now, as it comes to configuring these options, there are a lot of security and cost best practices. We have several tiers that allow you different levels of access patterns depending on how frequently you want to back up this data to Azure and how much latency you want to have in terms of recovery. So hot tier, for example, is great for operational backups of cloud native applications, whereas the archive tier is great for long-term retention of backups of on-premises data and applications. What you get with blob storage is you get an air-gapped and isolated tenant. You own that subscription, you own that data, but it's separated from where your applications are running. Now, if I look to the right, what we have on the right side is ways for you to secure these backups that you store on blob storage. We all know well about immutability, which ensures your data is not tampered by any malicious actor. There are lots of knobs that you have available as a customer to be able to get the perfect kind of resilience that you need and the perfect kind of security that you need for the backups that land up on Azure Blob Storage.
Yeah, that sure is a lot of knobs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you look at the Veeam solutions we spoke about a minute ago, right? They protect these workloads as a data platform that you can deploy via Azure Marketplace or on premises or in a mix of both, right? And that's self-managed, or potentially if you have a service provider that is, Veeam expert, you could get consulting and help from them as well. But some customers have been telling us that as a service is easier, right? And that if you deploy an M365 tenant, it's as a service, that the backup should be as a service as well. So this is a managed offering through Veeam and with Microsoft together, right? It's hosted on Azure, and this protects M365 and Azure workloads. The idea really is that as Veeam is evolving, that we'll be able to offer you both of these models where you have the as a service offering available, making it easier for you to manage. So when we look at the two available today, we'll talk about one more in a minute. Veeam Data Cloud for M365 allows you to quickly click and deploy protection for M365 with simple fixed price billing. And Veeam Data Cloud for Azure exists as well. And these allow you to retrieve what you need when you need it and not really have to think as hard, right? The security of these solutions is externally validated. There's encryption, MFA, granular RBAC, and it's just a very simple, nice way to protect your data. But we also spoke about all of these other workloads, right? Especially the ones that might live in between in this world where you might have a bit of workloads on premises and in Azure, some physical data that lives somewhere. And what if you could put these all somewhere on Azure as a destination, but do so with a fixed and predictable cost model, right? And so we haven't really talked about this much yet, but there were some announcements that have been made right before Ignite. And these particular announcements talk about our new Veeam Vault offering. And what this will allow you to do is send your workloads, your backups via Veeam Backup and Replication, for example, to Azure, but with a Veeam wrapper around it. You don't have to worry about all the complexity that Saurabh just spoke about. I'm excited also that the pricing is quite good. So that means that you get a good deal out of it as a customer as well, because you don't have to worry about immutability extensions, put calls, get calls, having to do the math on, okay, how much is this actually going to cost me? So as this grows, you'll see that there's some roadmap visibility from Veeam Data Cloud's perspective. Veeam Data Cloud will cover more and more workloads with time. And then the workloads that live in Veeam Backup and Replication, sort of the unified on-premises model, those can be sent to Veeam Cloud Vault. Now, why would this matter to you, right? Configuring immutability actually is a little bit of work, and making sure that you're not only logically separating the data and making it immutable, but putting it in a different subscription owned by a different tenant, potentially a different vendor who takes the responsibility is a nice thing. Making sure that this data is encrypted, of course, is key. You aren't able to send data that is not encrypted there. From a Veeam perspective, what happens is that the data is always encrypted, meaning we cannot see your data, only your Veeam Backup and Replication server can. And then if we think about its availability, right, we already spoke about that. Azure has 11 nines of durability. And from a security perspective, it's a fully managed solution. And we talked about predictability of pricing already, right? I'm aware that the time is going fast here and there's a lot of things to cover. But this is all about making it simple. So you have per terabyte pricing. There is a window of how much you can download on that as well. And you don't have to think about extra API charges. Why would you do this, right? You have your backup. Backups are useless without any recovery, right? So you send your data to Azure Blob. Now what are you going to do? So from a larger picture perspective, right, we integrate with Azure Blob in all of our solutions. So it's possible to do things like recover in mass to Azure if you want to, meaning that you had your on-premises data center and it's gone and you can start your backups from Azure Blob. Veeam Direct Restore to Azure is a really fast solution because there's not really much of a conversion process, meaning that you can run your VMs pretty quickly. And Veeam Data Cloud Vault currently supports all the workloads Veeam Backup and Replication does as well. Now, I've kind of hinted at this, right? We spoke about ransomware in the very beginning. But as a company, we've changed a lot as to what we're doing here, right? I just wanted to quickly cover this off. When it comes to ransomware prevention, we have the ability to validate your backups, of course. We have inline malware detection powered by AI. We have Yara rules that allow you to configure specific scanning logic as well. And then we effectively give you this pre-tested clean recovery. But also if you're in a situation where you have a problem, Veeam Support has always had this ability to help you with that, right? Obviously, it's best effort, but if you have an attack, we'll help you through that as much as we can. And now we have acquired Coveware, which allows you to give you kind of that next step experience for if you are in an unfortunate situation in this area where we have the largest commercial database of cyber incident data. So that really kind of gives you that full story around what we're doing here. And we mentioned that we would tease a little bit about machine learning and AI as well, right? So threat detection, of course, is machine learning and AI driven. Intelligent diagnostics in Veeam One also, where we get customer data from different support tickets. We anonymize it, we learn from it, and then give you definition files back where you can learn what's wrong with your environment based on other people's experience. And then there's AI assistance in the products as well. So you can ask questions in context help, right? Of course, it's only the beginning. There's more to come. But we just spoke about how we've taken our products really and made them as a service, right, for Microsoft. And so M365 Azure, and then of course you can store your data in Data Cloud Vault. And thank you so much for the partnership, Saurabh. I mean, this has been a journey. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Johan. I think this work that we've done together for our joint customers really simplifies, as you said, taking away the complexity of the various knobs, the various great options that we have for customers, and it gives the flexibility to really dial up or dial down the complexity depending on how much control and flexibility you need. You could be an enterprise customer that wants to have that same level of control. You want to have that same level of complexity because your workloads demand it. And you have that option with your subscription model. Or you could be a customer that says, hey, I really want to focus on my other initiatives, which might include AI as well. And the Veeam Data Cloud suite of solutions allows you to do that extremely effectively. I'm very excited, by the way, about all the AI and ML advancements that Veeam is making, including the AI assistants. So now you have an expert cyber incident recovery solution without having to worry about all the cyber recovery capabilities or cyber security capabilities or talent in your organization. So it augments that workforce that you have and enables you to drive that, that great data resilience for business continuity. So really excited about this and really thankful to Johan and the Veeam team for the partnership.
No, really appreciate it. To learn more, of course, we'll provide some links as well, but you can go to vee.am/vault, and the same for Data Cloud and the data freedom campaigns that we're running. And you can see the pricing as well. I don't know how official this is yet, but it's in my slide. I was allowed to add it. So $14 per terabyte per month is a pretty good deal. So pretty excited about that one. Thank you so much for watching.